Welcome to the webinar on landscape restoration and nature-based solutions that Wageningen University is organizing together with our partners. Nice to have you all. We have visitors, so many registrations from all over the world. So before we start, let me mention our partners in this webinar. You can also see them on top of the slides. It's the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, the Landscape Finance Lab, Future for Nature Academy, Arcadis, and the International Association of Students in Agriculture and Related Sciences. Yeah, also welcome partners and welcome to our speakers from the partner organizations. Last year, we organized the Nature-Based Solutions Challenge at Wageningen University and Research. And next year, we will start the Nature-Based Future Challenge. In between, we organized 3 webinars. In February, we organized a webinar on biodiversity and nature-based solutions. And today, we will organize the second webinar on landscape restoration and nature-based solutions. So before we start, I want to guide you through our program of today. This webinar is 1 hour. And well, we are at the opening now. My name is Mirjam Troost. I work at the Student Challenge team at Wageningen University and Research. Well, appearing on screen right now, hello Nina, welcome. This is Nina Maaswinkel. Nina studies at Wageningen University, but she's also a member of IAAS. So our first speaker will be Paul Chatterton from the Landscape Finance Lab. And then we will have a youth speaker from Brazil, Mr. Arthur Venturella. After the 2 speeches, Nina will moderate a discussion with Paul and Arthur. After that discussion, we will continue with a presentation of John Reich of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, followed by a presentation by Tiaza Adia, a youth speaker from India. She will talk about her fishing cat project. After the speeches, we will once again have a discussion moderated by Nina with John Reich and Tiaza Adia. After all the insights, I will end with telling you a little bit more about the Nature-Based Future Challenge. So make sure you are tuned until the end so you don't miss any information. Having said that, I want to give the floor to Nina, our moderator.
Thank you very much, Mirjam. I am very excited to be at the Masterclass today, and hopefully we can all learn a lot about the wonderful presentations that we will see today. So our first presenter of today is Paul Chatterton from the Landscape Finance Lab. So we will learn more about how can carbon investments be used for landscape restorations, and with examples from the field. So Paul Chatterton is the lead and founder of the Landscape Finance Lab, a global platform for incubating and financing sustainable landscapes that spun out of the conservation organization WWF in 2021. And Paul is a specialist in the fields of sustainability, climate change, land use, and green finance. So through the lab, he supports a global community innovating on landscape solutions. And we will hear all about it right now. Paul, I invite you to open your camera and kick off this masterclass of today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nina. And hello everyone out there. It's a real honor to be here. And an honor to be among some really brilliant entrepreneurs. I'm really looking forward to hearing the next parts of the presentations as well, because it's people like them that are going to save the planet. I want to take you on a journey into landscape finance, and I'm going to start by taking you back a long time in time, back to the beginning of my career in the mountains of Tasmania, Australia. This is the eucalypt forests of southern Tasmania. It includes the tallest flowering plants on this planet, the Eucalyptus regnans, or the mountain ash it's known as. These grow up to 90 meters tall. One many years ago was measured at 110 meters tall, so it's as tall as a redwood, but none are presently that tall. Spectacular trees, and they grow up out of a rainforest canopy that's already thought 30-40 meters tall. Now, all of this forest that I've been showing in the pictures were due to be logged in the 1980s, and as a with a team of friends, we stood against this. And one of my first jobs was actually to sit up one of these trees for a week in front of the bulldozer. That's me on the left-hand side there, with the policeman climbing up the tree to pull me down. And of course, this is spectacular stuff, but it's theatre within a much larger political campaign. And I was very lucky to be part of a very skilled team who were telling stories to the Australian public, running events around the world to put pressure on the government. And we saved those forests. We lost those trees that I was sitting up with two other tree sitters, but we saved 200,000 hectares of rainforest and tall eucalypt forest that's now part of the World Heritage Area. Now, where does finance come into this? Well, we kept on losing, even though we won that battle, we kept on losing the war. And it wasn't until my friend Alec, who was one of the tree sitters, started to use some of the tools of finance that were funding the logging, that things started to change. He and a team of people talked to some of the investors in Japan and convinced them that this may not have been in their best interest to be destroying such magnificent forests for the simple use of paper and pulp. And in parallel, they talked to the owner of Patagonia, who gave them the money to buy this wood chip mill. That's on the east coast of Tasmania, that was sending off the chips. Would you believe it? Alec became the CEO of that wood chip mill after they'd purchased the operation. And with his friends one night, he went in and chopped it down with an oxyacetylene torch. Delicious fun, but I must say a failure as well, because what we hadn't thought about was the economy of that part of Tasmania and the people who lived in those villages that were making a living from those forests. Not a big living, but really, finding a solution. This whole process taught me that finding a solution that includes people with nature, that thinks large and long term, is the only way to go. And that's why I work now on landscapes and landscape finance. We worked for a guy who became the head of the Australian Greens, Bob Brown, the first head of the Australian Greens in the Australian Parliament. And he would always say to us, if you're in a conflict, think 2 levels up and you'll find a solution. Think over larger space and time, and there's always a solution. And I think that's stuck with me ever since. So landscape finance is what we work on, and there's plenty of money out there. This is a map of global financial flows. About $200 trillion circulate the globe every year. And this little red box, these 2 little red boxes down here at the bottom, that's where most of the money comes from for nature and sustainability. It's remarkable. Governments, philanthropic, and overseas development aid. All of this money could be used for that purpose, and that's what we're now working on, unlocking some of that money for nature. The good news is that that's really starting to happen. A decade ago, when I got involved in this area, green bonds were only $2 billion worth of green bonds. There's now 2 trillion. Just this year, 2/3 of $1 trillion worth of green bonds are coming. A bond is just a collection of loans. It's money looking for places to invest so that it can get a return back on itself. And most of the money in green bonds over the last decade have been in energy infrastructure, in buildings, in transport. But that's changed dramatically in the last few years as well. There's now a really enormous widening of the amount of money that's available for forests, for agriculture, for water, all of the land-based activities. So how do you get that money down? A bond is in the order of 100 million. What does it take to get 100 million invested into a landscape? Well, landscapes are a very useful tool for doing that. If you want to get that money into projects, forestry projects, agricultural projects, you're just not going to get to the scale. Forestry projects tend to be in the tens of millions, millions to tens of millions, agricultural projects the same. But by connecting them together with water projects or fishery projects or energy projects, you can get to the scale that's possible for $100 million investment for sustainability bond size investment. And the good news is that also allows us to help people to think about long-term, how to solve long-term problems in a landscape. So having a much higher impact. We've been doing a lot of work on landscape investment over the last decade. It started back when we produced this book, the Little Sustainable Landscape book. We launched it at the Paris Climate Convention in 2016. And that set out a simple 5-step process for designing a landscape program, what we call the 5 elements. You bring the people together in the landscape, they decide what the problems are and the possible solutions. They come up with a vision and an action plan. They get the money and take action, and then you monitor and learn. It's just the project cycle led by the people in the landscapes. We teamed up with Common Land, the Dutch NGO, and linked in their 4 returns framework, which is, I think, a beautiful, elegant way of describing the SDGs. You get returns for nature, you get returns for society, and you get financial returns if you develop your landscape program properly. But most importantly, you get inspirational returns. You bring hope back into the landscape. People can see how their landscape might thrive, and they work together to achieve that. And then every landscape has to have at least 3 zones: a space where nature is protected and can grow, a space where production happens and can concentrate more, produce more with less land and less resources, and then in between a regenerative zone where nature is restoring and you can still get production. And we think about that over a generation, that process over a generation, but you should be able to get some results in the first year onwards. So that's the theory of landscapes and landscape finance. What does the practice look like? Let me give you a couple of examples. This is a project on the left-hand side, a project that we developed in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is one of the jurisdictional RED programs that were invested in by the World Bank back a decade ago. We started building this. And it's the last one we would have put our money on, but it's gone very well. It's protected an area, I think, about 3 to 4 times the size of the Netherlands. Nina, I think, are you telling me that I'm running out of time? Yes? All right, very good. And remarkably, it's led by 15 local organizations that are each doing their own thing to protect forest, to stop logging. The logging companies are stepping out of this and helping with plantations rather than chopping down native forest and so on. Another example is in the reefs of Fiji, where we've built a private sector platform called Matanataki to get $50 million of investment into saving the reefs of Fiji. One of the first things they did was buy waste dumps that were leaching into the reefs and turning them into recycling centres. In the peatlands of Scotland, where this one single area in the very north of Scotland, 400,000 hectares, it's a bit bigger than Amsterdam, I guess, it contains more carbon than twice as much carbon as all of the forests of the UK combined, and a whole lot of biodiversity. So it's a no-brainer to protect that. It'll store much more carbon over time and give a home to a whole lot of nature. And then private sector companies can play a role as well. This is a program we we initiated, I should say, in the jungles of Sumatra in Indonesia. This little thin ribbon of forest here across the island contains tigers, orangutans, and elephants, one of the only places where you find them together. And Michelin's rubber plantation below was threatening that. They worked with a whole set of local stakeholders, including the national park, and created a $215 million sustainability bond that's now really protected that land and has been quite commercially successful. So there's a few examples of the world of landscape finance. It's big, slow, costly, difficult to put together. We're still working out how to do this, but it's clear that this is the way to solve the large problems of the planet, to get long-term results and to make sure that they're locally owned. And the cost of one landscape program we estimate is about €100 million. That's less than a fighter plane and that's more than a fighter plane and less than a battleship. So it's a lot of money, there's no question. But to give you a sense, we think that it takes about 100 landscapes to save biodiversity, to reduce natural carbon, to secure water flows and so on, which should cost about $10 billion. Now, the US General Ford, the battleship, the latest battleship the Americans have produced, cost $16 billion to build. So honestly, which war do we want to fight? If we want to protect nature and climate, landscapes are the thing to invest in, not battleships. And of course, it's not a battle. It's a process. So back to you, Nina. But I'd leave you all with the question. What tree will you climb out? Where do you take your stand? And once you're up there, how can you think over space and time, most broadly over space and time, so that you can include everyone in your vision? Thank you, Nina.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation. It was really interesting and really insightful. Also, I really like that you came back to your background and the history from a tree sitter to the head of Landscape Finance Lab. And we would love to hear more from you. I also see some questions in the chat for you, so maybe you can answer them. And then I think also what is really important, what you said, you bring hope back into landscape. So that is beautiful to round off with. But we will hear back from you in the discussion and the reflection. I would like to introduce our next speaker of today, which is Arthur Venturella. Arthur, welcome on screen. We will hear from you today about landscape restoration, nature-based solutions in practice, and about PURA. So Arthur is a master's student in mining engineer, but focusing on the ecological restoration of mined landscapes, also a researcher, agroforestry consultant and educator, a whole list. It's wonderful to see, and started with the community-based projects in Indonesia, but now doing community-based projects in Brazil, where you are from, Arthur. And PURA, Regenerative Culture and Nature-Based Solutions, is something that you set up a social enterprise last year, also with the nature-based student challenge of Wageningen University, but now also participating in Youth Food Lab, which is a new incubator by Wageningen University and World Food Forum and IAAS, the Student Association. Arthur, we are very honored to have you here today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nina. It's a pleasure to be here. So hello to all. As Nina said, I'm Arthur Venturella. I'm a mining engineer, researcher, agroforester, and I'm founder of PURA, and I'm very passionate about restoring ecosystems with social impact. So our current food system is inefficient and unsustainable. It leads to the increase of climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the increase of social inequalities. And to transform it, we need a regenerative agri-food model. And to do so, we created WUR to facilitate the transition to a regenerative culture and to scale up ecosystem restoration. So we provide a regenerative transition package with model farms, providing trainings, and also with support and advisory. So we are able to trade regenerative commodities, social biodiversity products. So WUR works in an open platform, connecting companies that want to increase, to improve the ESG reputation, and farmers and communities that want to implement landscape restorations projects. So we start always collecting data and working in a participatory way. So we do the diagnosis together with the different actors involved in this landscape. Then we start participatory planning for then implement the project with lots of trainings and lots of in situ, in local action. So then we can monitor and we can see the impact in different dimensions, in the ecological, in the social, and the economic dimension, so we can measure the impact. Last year, we through the Nature-Based Solution Challenge from Wageningen, we provide a complete training in agroecological agroforestry systems with a focus on socio-biodiversity products. So the first workshop was about the introduction to agroecological agroforestry systems. So we gave the foundations, the basis of agroecology and agroforestry, and we implemented an agroforestry system from scratch. So participants were able to see in practice how we implement an agroforestry. We plan the design together with the participants, and we implemented the system with them. The second module was about planning, management, and enrichment of agroecological agroforestry systems. So participants were able to plan their own productive system, always taking into consideration native plants that can support the ecological ecosystem, but also the economic ecosystems. Then participants were also able to practice management, that is one of the most challenges parts of agroforestry. So here, just to present some of the native species that we were working during the workshops. So these are fruits, native fruits from Myrtaceae family, and that also we can distill to make essential oil. So we were presenting different uses of socio-biodiversity, because we believe that to conserve and to restore biodiversity, we have to put these into our daily lives. So we were presenting to participants the different uses, functions of biodiversity, of socio-biodiversity, plants that are used for generations for native people. And the third module was about processing of socio-biodiversity products, and mainly about socio-biocultural networks. So we were able to map the initiatives where they are located. And here we can see a focus in an area, because the workshop was in a specific territory. But with this dynamic, this participatory dynamic, as you can see on the images, the participants putting the targets in different places to see how is the supply chain, the different links of this supply chain, how they are working. So we were able to see where to put efforts to improve the quality of the supply chain of agroecological agroforestry products. So we could map, we could from participants, we could see the main gaps and demands. So training is a very important step to get landscape restoration. So participants ask for more trainings, for more workshops, and mainly in different bioregions. So with these, we can systematize different consortiums, different designs to different bioregions, and also implement demonstrative units. Participants also ask for more technical assistance and greater institutional and governmental support. So they ask for an actor that can help to connect the different stakeholders and also help to manage the different goals, the different needs, the different objectives of each. Also, credit funds was a very important demand. So we are able to think long term. So this is a very challenge to restoration. It's about long term, how we plan actions in the long term. So participants also said that a big challenge is to commercialize the agroecological agroforest systems, because there is no market yet implemented. So this is also an area that we see that we have to put our efforts on. And I think this could summarize what we did last year with Nature-Based Solution Challenge. And for this year, we are organizing three more workshops in different bioregions of the southern state of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for your presentation. It was great to see also the photos and the real life examples that you showed. Wonderful. I would like to invite also Paul Chatterton back to the screen, the stage, and then we will start our discussion. Yes, welcome back. Arthur and Paul, I would like to create a short discussion and ask you both the question. So you are both scaling up on different ways with your organization, social enterprise. How would you say you can scale up your landscape projects to have even a more broader impact? Arthur, you are trying to scale up your projects. What is something that you focus on?
Social mobilization, I think it's the main thing. So this is a movement that comes from the above. So it's a bottom-up movement, but also we need a top-down mobilization. So it's what we call a polycentric governance. So that's what we are trying to do at the same time that we are mobilizing people on the ground. We are also talking with different government institutions to help us to implement these solutions.
And Paul, are you focusing on the same aspect as Arthur does, or is it maybe different because you work on, let's say, a big of a broader scale?
Yeah, a bit similar. We don't go looking for landscapes. They come to us, and we put them through this 4 returns framework process. We have them test themselves first as to whether they've got the conditions to hold something big. Most of them do, and often it's just something small that's missing. So we help them find that. I tell you, the biggest problem that we have is finding the little bit of money to keep to do that early design work. It's easier to find $100,000 than it is to find $100 million, would you believe? So what we're working on is a couple of funds as catalytic facilities to provide that early finance for business people and platforms like Arthur's and many others who are trying to do this sort of work.
Great to hear. Thank you very much, both of you. Unfortunately, I have to cut the discussion a little bit due to time constrictions, but thank you very much both for your presentation.
Pleasure.
Okay, I would like to welcome our next speaker of today, which is John Reich from the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, FFAR. Hello, John, good to see you. John is a scientific program director at FFAR and focuses mainly on building new partnerships for FFAR to create funds for research in food and agriculture. We are really excited to hear from you today and yeah, welcome.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the hosts, Nina and Mirjam, for having me today, and I look forward to discussing the topic. So I just want to say, because I'm not a scientist doing bench or field work, I'm taking the perspective of a person who realizes the importance of nature-based solutions and is concerned about the adoption and implementation of them and how we can accelerate their use where possible and get the most value out of them, including how it can provide multiple benefits outside of just the environmental benefits that we talk about. Oh. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, John, is there
so
something?
First I'm gonna...
Sorry to interrupt. Is there something on your microphone? Maybe we hear you a little bit rusty, but maybe you can just continue your presentation and I will interrupt if it's not correct. Okay.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So first, what I'm going to do is tell you about the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, which we also call FFAR, and it's where I work. So FFAR was created in 2014 by the United States Congress. We are research funders. We receive money from Congress to fund scientific research. So everything that we do is tied to scientific research. And we have the caveat that we have to partner with entities outside the US federal government to fund this research. So basically what that means, for every dollar we spend, we have to get $1 of support from a non-US federal government source. And the science we fund is aimed at funding innovative science to meet the challenges that the food and agricultural sector faces. One more slide about FFAR, which is just our current foci. So our current foci are these challenge areas that are listed here. We have a challenge area, next generation crops, advanced animal systems, sustainable water management, health, ag nexus, urban food systems, and soil health. Sorry, am I breaking up again?
Yeah, sorry, John, to interrupt your presentation. We hear a little bit of, I don't know, a crusty sound on the microphone. Is there maybe something that is on your microphone?
Yeah, I'll remove it. And I'll turn off my camera too. Is that better?
I think your camera is fine, but now I can hear you well. So yeah, let's try again. Okay. I hope I don't have to interrupt again. Good luck with your presentation.
Sorry. I think it's just my internet. Sorry about that. Okay, so hopefully you all can hear me. So as I was preparing for this talk, I was really trying to figure out what value I bring to the series of speakers. Now, I just told you I work at a funding agency that funds science, and this is where my mind is when I talk about topics, areas that need to be advanced for the betterment of society. Part of the topic today for me is how do we solve the challenges of today and the future and do so in a sustainable way. I often think of nature-based solutions as potentially touching or having an impact on all of these different sectors surrounding this green bubble I have here on this screen of nature. And it has the potential to change our relationships to each of them. So even though nature-based solutions is a relatively new umbrella term for a variety of areas, research in some of the areas that falls under that umbrella have been going on for some time and have been adopted across the globe. However, we want to shift society to utilizing more solutions for a variety of health and environmental impacts. And I believe you are all on this call because there are a number of potential benefits people see from utilizing nature-based solutions as part of the tools to mitigate the impact of climate change. So we all know that they are thought to be cheaper solutions compared to the alternatives we typically use for specific purposes. And then they also have environmental benefits, and that they can help communities and regions with resilience to climate change. However, there are challenges. So outside of the evidence base that others are trying to build up and create shared knowledge resources that different communities can use, You're faced with how these solutions get paid for and maintained by both the private and public sectors, which is related to getting stakeholders to buy in to using nature-based solutions when we may not see the impacts from them immediately, which also ties into adoption. So these barriers all make me think about the societal challenges that we need to overcome. Many of the challenges we face need to be considered as part of a system, which has been highlighted over the last decades in the move towards nexus research. So an example of this is the food, energy, water nexus, which is not the only area of research by any means. So this research highlights that we need to understand how to use resources efficiently and where we can get those resources from, taking into account the competition for resources that happen between sectors, and how are we going to have to think differently about resource utilization. So for instance, for agriculture to happen, it takes a lot of resources. It takes lands, water, energy, and a number of other things. And the sectors that provide these resources traditionally exist in silos. So the idea is to identify unintended impacts and potential synergies across the sectors. And in doing so, we have not really focused on the resource allocation aspect of it, so that are important for each of these sectors and where that and how they get distributed. But I think for nature-based solutions, it is important to think about the role that they can play in producing resources for multiple sectors in society, the quality and form of those resources, and to do so in an environmentally friendly and integrated way. So outside of just environmental impacts, we need to understand the role of nature-based solutions in providing these resources, which would be really useful, right? So in addition to their role in providing resources, we need to understand how to integrate nature-based solutions at multiple scales from a region to a city. This understanding includes how a network or coupled nature-based solutions can function together to meet regional challenges focused on sustainability. And we all know that cities are hubs for connected infrastructure, and they tend to have policies and market conditions that give priority to tech sustainability solutions. So that compete with space for nature-based solutions. So how do we accelerate integration between gray infrastructure that exists now and in the future and nature-based solutions? And how can nature-based solutions complement this infrastructure? In addition to that, how do we prioritize paying for something? So using both public and private financing that have long-term deliverables in some cases and where solutions may not be as effective as other solutions. So when I was prepping for this presentation, I was looking for examples where nature-based solutions can complement one another or have synergistic impacts on one another to reach one goal or multiple goals. Unfortunately, I mostly found examples where they were looked at in the context of the individual impacts that one solution can have, irrespective of the context of the situation. So for instance, I was hoping to find things like a nature-based solution that deals with purification of industrial water sources that can aid in seagrass restoration for coastal protection, where both would have synergistic environmental impacts in addition to other societal impacts. However, finding such examples was hard. I'm hoping that with some of the information that comes across in the multiple modeling efforts that are occurring, that we can find some of that. And because I really see how such information would be interesting to know when we think about the design of a city and the utilization of its resources. And as we begin to think about adoption of nature-based solutions, we have to understand that there are trade-offs with them, and these trade-offs can impact society negatively or positively, depending on who you are as a stakeholder within that system. So for instance, reclaiming lands as part of a reforestation effort may be good for climate change mitigation, but it comes at the expense of land that could be used or is currently being used to produce biomass for energy or for agriculture. So I know people are already paying farmers for ecosystem services, so understanding how we can get to adoption through different incentives might be beneficial. And this another example, things like using constructed wetlands that can be used for a variety of things depending on their design, can require a lot of land, whether it is for water treatment, increasing biodiversity, or to help with flood control. The type of wetland constructed could impact agriculture and potential flooding of nearby lands, which could have impacts on their adoption. So it's important to understand the trade-offs that can lead to their adoption or not. And we also need to think about the synergies with other elements of a system and the multifunctionalities of that system. All right, so value can come from providing multiple benefits, I think. So for instance, constructed wetlands, depending on their design, could be used for water treatment to remove some of the pollutants that come from different water sources. So potentially replacing some gray infrastructure as it has done. But also the benefits of potential habitat creation and nutrient removal, and may have greater impacts if partnered with other nature-based solutions. If it was part of something that led to nutrient recovery, that could provide economic benefits if it did so in a sustainable and economically feasible way. For seagrass, it could be that it stabilizes coast loss, acts as a carbon storage, and creates habitats and nurseries valuable for commercial and non-commercial fishing groups, providing some semi-immediate economic benefit. Functionality could be providing resources to state or industries, where nature-based solutions could be a step in resource recovery. An example of this could be, how do we recover potential resources from wastewater or from plants that are used in phytoremediation? And economic feasibility would be important here, and it most likely working in conjunction with elements not considered nature-based solutions. So real quick, the areas that I'm really excited about in this area in terms of research-wise and are the optimization of nature-based solutions and how you can couple them to act synergistically across multiple scales. I'm also interested in what nature-based solutions can play in circularity of systems, and this could include resource recovery or transformation into a product that could be used by industry. And lastly, the integration of nature-based solutions with infrastructure. All right, that's my last slide.
Thank you very much, John, for your presentation. I think we can invite the questions and comments to the chat. And I think also the main message, which is really important, is that there is not one way or one solution, one approach to nature-based solutions and landscape restoration. You say it's important to provide resources, but also to create this network and to have this system approach. So those will be important takeaways. We will see you back at the discussion and reflection in a little bit. I would like to invite Tiasa on to our virtual floor, Tiasa Adia, who will talk about also landscape restoration and nature-based solutions in practice about the Fishing Cat project. So Tiasa Adia is an Indian conservationist committed to safeguarding the fishing cat and its wetland habitat in Asia. You bring people together and create a network to secure the future of the animals and humans dependent on this ecosystem. We are very excited to hear your presentation, so the floor is yours, Tiasa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this very important platform. And, you know, we are in the midst of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, spanning from 2021 to 2030. And wetlands, by virtue of their several life-sustaining functions, should be in the midst of these restoration efforts. Again, wetlands are the most threatened ecosystems on the planet. In fact, we are losing wetlands 3 times faster than forests. So the general understanding of wetlands is still poor. And therefore, certain wetland types which have an ephemeral presence of water, for example, marshes, are still remain at the margin of society's consciousness. So it is here that the presence of certain species can bolster conservation efforts by snatching the limelight, so as to speak. And I work on such a species called the fishing cat. It is a wildcat species which has physical properties that helps it to occur in wetlands. For example, it has a waterproof coat. So we can think of the fishing cat as a wetland specialist, so as to speak. Now, I co-founded the Fishing Cat project, which is a platform, along with my colleague, Mr. Partho Dey, in 2010. And our motto is to actually link fishing cat conservation to healthy wetlands and human sustenance. Now, where does the fishing cat occur? This is a predictive map of where the species occurs. If you just look at the bluish region, that is where the fishing cat is likely to occur. And the very blue regions are the most promising for the fishing cats. So it is a cat that is restricted to South and Southeast Asia. And if we look closely, we will see that, it is very much tied to the major river basins of South and Southeast Asia, starting from the Indus to Ganga, Brahmaputra, Mahanadi, Godavari, Krishna, Irrawaddy, Salween, Chao Phraya, Mekong, and probably in the Red River. This is a predictive map. So we are still in the process of discovering where they actually occur right now. So coming back, then, the fishing cat is restricted to low elevation wetlands, which are connected to the major river basins in South and Southeast Asia. And I happen to work in, one of the places that I happen to work is in Chilika, which is Asia's largest brackish water lagoon. And occurs at the it is fed by the tributaries of the Mahanadi River. If we look at the map on the right hand side, we will see that so basically this is the map of Chilika, and Chilika is around 1,065 square kilometers. That is the expanse during the monsoon, and during the summer, it contracts to 935 square kilometers. So in the map, you can see a shaded region, and that is the seasonally inundated portion of the Chilika Basin. So why am I focusing here? Is because it gives habitat, it provides habitat to the fishing cat. And this is the kind of habitat, natural habitat, that is present in this seasonally inundated scape. There are two wetland types that we find here. One is the marshlands, which are herbaceous plant-dominated, and in Chilika, in this scape, it is reed-dominated marshes, which we can see in the background. The grass-like structures of the reed represent the reed-dominated marshes. And in the foreground, we can see wet meadows. So wet meadows and marshes are what forms the natural habitat here. However, Chilika is mostly present outside the protected area network, which also means that much of the portion is human modified and used. So, for example, we have seasonal agriculture that is practiced in this region. And the picture that you see here, it represents a naturally farmed wetland, indigenous wetland rice variety, which is flood tolerant, which means it is grown during the monsoon season. So when the flood levels rise, this crop, this rice crop, is naturally adapted to the flood because it grows in height. So it is flood adapted. So Subhash, who is this person standing here, is part of the team, field team in Chilika. Subhash is, hi Anita, I can see you. So Subhash is around 5 feet 6 inches tall, and you can see that the wetland plant is around, it's pretty tall. In the background of this picture, you can see the wetland rice, and in the foreground, you can see pug marks which belong to the fishing cat. So this rice, this crop, this seasonal crop actually gives habitat to the fishing cat, as well as you can see the shallow water layers. So there are lots of native indigenous fishes like snakeheads and eels, which also provide food to the fishing cat and indigenous fishermen, which takes refuge inside these croplands. In addition, it gives habitat to birds, native birds, reptiles, mollusks. It's a biodiverse, rich land use, which serves both human sustenance as well as biodiversity conservation. However, there is what I would look at as a cancerous growth of a particular destructive land use, which is uprooting all of this, because this indigenous rice variety is locally consumed and at very low prices. Therefore, businessmen from outside, when they come in and they want to lease out these lands from the farmers, and they want to, what they're doing is they're converting this wetland into aquaculture farms, intensive aquaculture farms. And that, in a sense, is disrupting the whole ecological fabric, which also, one of the bad effects of this is, at certain times of the year, there is a lot of these toxic effluents which is released from these ecological farms directly into Chilika's waters, which leads to certain events like this when the native fishes die, which is also detrimental for indigenous fishermen. So in a sense, what we are trying to do is promote this local rice variety in the cities, because these are naturally farmed. What I mean by naturally farmed is because these are grown during the monsoon season, there is no added chemicals and pesticides. It doesn't really make sense. You apply these and they are flooded away. So you get chemical and pesticide-free food. And if it's sold in the cities, and if the farmers actually get 2 to 3 times return, then maybe this whole tide towards ecological destruction of the wetlands can be stemmed. And perhaps this will create an avenue where these wetlands which have already been lost can be restored. So here is where our vision comes in, linking fishing cat conservation to healthy wetlands and human sustenance. I'm sorry I'm over time, so thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Tiasa, so much for your presentation. I think we learned a lot about India, but also about the Fishing Cat project, but especially on how to restore wetlands. I think that was your main message and your main goal. Let's move on to a small reflection and discussion again. And I would also like to invite John Reich again to the floor if it works out with camera, otherwise just a microphone, of course. Tiasa, I will start off with a question for you. So within your project, how do you ensure that local communities are engaged and committed in the Fishing Cat project, and in that sense also in this landscape restoration activities or wetland restoration activities? You are on mute, I think.
Yeah. Rather than projecting it as a, of course, we do try to involve people in direct fishing cat conservation. But one of our approaches, which I think would be more relevant to talk about in this platform, is to simply, rather ideate, projects where we can link people's livelihoods to protection of the wetlands or conservation of the wetlands within a wise use concept and within a socio-ecological approach, so that there are synergies between human sustenance and biodiversity conservation goals. So for this, of course, like working with the local communities is one thing, but also visualizing the market chains requires us to work with, or will require us to work with several other stakeholders, particularly in the marketing industry, as well as advocacy and advertisement agencies. So in a sense, it requires us to work with multiple stakeholders to kind of realize, and synchronize the goals of human sustenance and conservation.
Okay, so in a way, what you say is you are trying to set out that there is a need for change, also depending on their livelihoods in a way. So, John, if you would say that you would try to convince in your partnerships the need for change, how would you do that? Or how is your approach looking at projects like those of Tiasa, the Fishing Cat project, with FFAR? How do you approach this?
Yeah, I think I try to look at it kind of from like this holistic lens and the challenges that we're trying to solve, and then how to include as many stakeholders that can offer those solutions, and those solutions as part of the overarching goal of our project. I think it's a hard question, and I think it is context specific or project specific of how we try to do that. But we definitely try to involve stakeholders as much as we can. We know, especially the people who implement or who are impacted by those solutions. Yeah.
Okay, and so Tiasa, would maybe you say this need for change, would you also maybe link this to the Sustainable Development Goals that are created, that we need to strive to reach them, of course? Would you say that your Fishing Cat project could be linked to some of these Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, not just the Fishing Cat project. I think whoever is working on wetland ecosystems, has this avenue, because wetlands are central to achieving many sustainable development goals, with improving water quality, sustainable management of production and consumption, efficient resource consumption. These are identified as universal priority targets. And this directly caters to several SDGs. For example, SDG 1, which is no poverty, SDG 2, which is zero hunger, SDG 6, which is clean water and sanitation, SDG 3, which is good health and well-being, SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, and several others like 12, 13, 14, which includes life underwater, responsible consumption, production, climate action. So basically, if we focus on conserving wetlands within the wise use concept and within with a socio-ecological approach, then it kind of caters to both the sustenance of local human communities as well as society at large, because wetlands are climate buffers, as well as very importantly biodiversity conservation, which tends to remain in the periphery of our discussions because we are so human centered in everything. So I think wetlands, especially those which exist outside protected areas, allow us to investigate and examine such approaches where we can find synergies between human sustenance goals and conservation goals, which is a repetition of what I said, but yes.
Wonderful to hear this, Tiasa. I think it is wonderful to hear from all of you about these wonderful examples and these concepts and organizations that lead to landscape restoration and nature-based solutions. I think this is a wonderful example that we would hopefully also see more in the future. So with that being said, I would like to thank you all, the speakers for today, to join the masterclass on landscape restoration and nature-based solutions. I would like to give the floor to Miriam again to tell us a little bit more about what is next. Will we see next on the Nature-Based Future Challenge?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nina. So with this, we end our webinar almost. Before, I want to share some information with you about the Nature-Based Future Challenge that we are organizing from the end of this year. So at the end of this year, we will ask student teams, youth teams to subscribe for our challenge to design and visualize a nature-based future for the Bangladesh River Delta in 2100. The assignment is to design maps, visuals, and transformation pathways. And we will share some more information in the chat. The website will be shared. And after this webinar, we will send you also some more information with a link to the challenge and also information on how you can apply for the challenge. Having said that, I want to thank our moderator, Nina Maaswinkel. I think you've done a wonderful job. And I want to thank our 4 speakers. Thank you so much. I want to also thank our partners, of course, and last but not least, the audience. Well, yeah, it was really great to have so many of you with us today. Having said that, I want to close this session with a video on the Nature-Based Future Challenge.
Wageningen University and Research presents the Nature-Based Future Challenge, a global competition for the brightest young minds to create a better future for all. Climate change and biodiversity loss are amongst the biggest challenges of our times and put our future food security under threat. To ensure a prosperous future, there is a strong need for transformative change towards a nature-inclusive society. This calls for new, out-of-the-box solutions, nature-based solutions. Therefore, Wageningen University and Research calls young changemakers from around the world to develop an innovative perspective for future generations for one of the most dynamic regions in the world, a river delta that is one of the world's most densely populated and fertile areas. With an abundance of wildlife and mangrove forest, and extremely disaster-prone, the Ganges-Brahmaputra Meghna Delta in Bangladesh. The Nature-Based Future Challenge. Join us to create a better future for all. Develop a nature-based future vision for the Bangladesh Delta.